Good morning, church. It's nice to see you guys. Hope you had a great week. We're going to start by singing some songs. I'd love it if you would stand up and sing with us.
Joy to the world, the Lord has come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room. In heaven and nature sing. And heaven and nature sing. We will sing joy. Savior reigns. Let men their songs employ, while fields and floods, rocks, hills and plains repeat the sounding joy. Repeat the sounding joy. We will sing joy. We will sing joy. We will sing joy, joy to the world. He rules the world with truth and grace, and makes the nations prove the glories of his righteousness and wonders of his love and wonders of his love. And wonders of his love. We will sing joy. We will sing joy. We will sing joy. Joy to the world. We will sing joy. We will sing joy. We will sing joy. Joy to the world. We will sing joy. We will sing joy. We will sing joy. Joy to the world. We will sing joy. We will sing joy. We will sing joy. Joy to the world.
I was hopeless. I knew I was lost. Death and darkness were my only songs. I needed someone to come rescue me. Then mercy heard my plea.
Lord, you found me, you healed me, you called me from the grave. You gave me a real love. Thank you, Jesus. You washed my sins away. And now I'm living, I'm forgiven. You came and set me free. That's what your mercy did for me.
You gave me beauty for my guilty stains. Now I'm living day to day by his grace.
of every Lazarus. Your voice is calling me out right now. I know you're able, and my God, come through again. You can do all things. You can do all things but fail. 'Cause you never lost the battle. No, you've never lost the battle. And I know you never will. Everything's possible by the power of the Holy Ghost. A new wind is blowing right now, breaking my heart of stone, taking over like a Jericho. My walls are all crashing down right now. I know you're able, and my God, come through again. You can do all things. You can do all things but fail. 'Cause you've never lost a battle. No, you've never
Good morning. Welcome to Encounter Church. My name is Chris Causey. I'm lead pastor here. And I'm so glad that you are here today. We're going to be continuing this series that I've been super excited about. It's a series that's tied to the Christmas story, and kind of last week I started off with just showing you the nativity scene and the kind of the plasticity of the chubby white people version that exists in my house with the little people one. And that hopefully you left last week with the sense that like there is more to the Christmas story than just chubby little white figurines that actually have nothing to do or looks nothing like the actual first Christmas story. That the first Christmas story was so powerful and has a lot to say about our story and how it intersects. That it really is this good news, this good tidings of comfort and joy that changes where you are and where I am. And so last week I kind of set the tone that I really want you to hear in the phrase Merry Christmas so much more than just simple holiday greeting, but that there's a war cry, there is a call to a greater, higher hope and confidence. And that what I want to do today, over the next 2 weeks, actually, it's kind of a part A and a part B, is look at the Christmas story. And today I'm going to do it a little bit indirectly. You'll see next week why this is coming from the Christmas story. But I'll look at the Christmas story and talk about how it intersects with our emotional and mental life. I don't know if you know this, but for almost 2 years now, we've been in a global pandemic. We've all been learning Greek letters and learning way too much about immune biology. We also have learned that our neighbors have a lot of opinions. Some of them are very ignorant, and some of ours are not ignorant, of course. And that we've learned all of this in the midst of the last 2 years and have watched our lives be upended. And in the course of that, we've had to confront one of the hardest people we have to live with. I think when you look back at the pandemic, what I think played out that is still playing out is that we were all forced when we were initially locked down to deal with the most difficult person in our life. It's not your kid, it's not your spouse, it's you. You are the hardest person to live with. Especially when a lot of the things that trigger, that keep you distracted, my proof text for why most of us were so ready to be distracted from ourselves is things like Tiger King became a thing that people watched. That was nothing more than how desperate we were to get away from this thing up here that we live with. That most of us had constructed lives that allowed us to ignore our thoughts, ignore our mental, emotional state, because our schedules and our streaming services kept us busy enough, kept us distracted enough, that we didn't have to linger and sit in some of the stuff that stewed inside of our minds. And the reality is that even the Surgeon General this past week testified to that when they looked at teens and anxiety and depression. And in many ways, kids are the canaries in the cave. They give us indications of what's coming, even if the rest of us aren't paying attention to it yet. And the fact that this pandemic has produced anxiety and depression and kind of observed levels in teenagers, I think is a warning sign for us that maybe we're dealing with something that if we leave unresolved is not going to leave us alone. And so to kind of take you on this journey over the next 2 weeks, I want to get very practical. But before I jump into the practicality of next week, I want to really jump into the paradigm of this week. Because what we'll find next week in the Christmas story is some very set practices that actually fostered emotional and mental health that was healthy. But you have to recognize that it was an operating system underneath those practices we'll look at next week. And it's those operating system that I want to look at today, this paradigm, this rhythm that you and I can incorporate into our lives intentionally that can change our lives. And here's how I know. Even if you don't believe any of the stuff I'm about to teach you this morning, I know it can change your life. The reason I know that is because of a research project done by the University of Connecticut, an anthropologist there, who observed this very fascinating trend that was playing out in the second oh my goodness, I can't say the word right now. The second Intifada, that is not the right way to say it, but my mind is blanking. So let me tell you what it is, and then the word will come to me like tonight at 3 a.m., and I'm going to sit up in bed, and I'm going to scream the word out. My wife's going to have a heart attack, and I'll be like, that's how I was supposed to say it, because I've said it 17 times this week. Anyways, from roughly 2000 and 2004-05, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict entered into a kind of a new level. It was the most devastating life-wise, death-wise, injury-wise, because there was an introduction of suicide bombers. So the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that went from 2000 to 2004 is called that second word that I can't say right now. And the thing that was interesting about that was the death rates, because of the suicide bombers, jumped drastically. About 4,000 people lost their lives. Some of them were kids, just foreigners. People just happened to be in public places where the suicide bombers would target. And there was a group of women in a city in Israel who adopted this practice that this anthropologist noticed. They had this practice of daily reciting the Psalms. Now, you need to know these women were secular Jews. They didn't believe in the Jewish faith. They didn't have a belief in God or any concept of God, but they recited regularly the Psalms. And what they found was, in the aftermath of studying that this group of women who had this regular practice, their anxiety levels were drastically different than the other women in the community, that these women were more comfortable going out shopping and riding buses and being in crowds. And the reason that was so significant was because suicide bombers were the primary means of kind of battle in this second kind of period of Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And that what he noticed, he couldn't actually quantify why, but I think the reason that these women had such a different response to what was playing out around them was that they were intuitively picking up on a pattern that was present in the Psalms. That was part of the operating system that we'll see next week was at work in the Christmas story, but that can work in your life this week. And to teach you that, I want to actually kind of make it a little bit more intentional. I want to tease out the pattern that's present in a lot of the Psalms that you have to realize before we jump into it. Psalms were just an ancient Jewish form of songs in the modern age. The biggest psalm writer in Jewish history was a guy named David. David was known for killing Goliath and being a great warrior, but he was also a man who was incredibly emotionally, mentally attuned and wrote some very moving songs and had powerful poetry that still exists today and still brings comfort to people all around the world almost 3,000 years later. And David had a rhythm when he wrote, a rhythm that allowed him to cover all types of emotional experiences. If you read through the Psalms, they cover the full gamut of the human experience. And today I want to take you to a psalm that is found inside of the book of Psalms. It's one that is famous in that its poetry is really moving. But I want to get to those parts. I want to focus on the last two verses. And if you don't have a Bible with you, I'm going to actually have it on the screen because I want you to see the subtlety of what's playing out, because in the subtlety is the paradigm that we can practice to experience emotional and mental health. So, in Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24, you find this prayer at the end of the song. He says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." He concludes this song with this prayer. And I think it's because David understood something that you and I oftentimes don't think about. The concept is called metacognition. It's about thinking about your thoughts. It's not something that naturally most of us do, but it was something that David, whether it was intuitive or whether he had learned intentionally from some family or some portion of his religious faith that was embedded inside of him, David understood the value of metacognition, of thinking about his thoughts. I was reminded of that this week. My daughter was asking me about my most traumatic memory that I've ever had, which is a very strange thing to talk to me about. as she's going to bed. It's an even stranger thing that I said, of course I'll talk about my most traumatic memory right before you fall asleep, sweetie, because I love you. And so I began to talk about my most traumatic memory. It was when I was 10 years old, and I was playing hide and seek with a group of friends of mine. We were out in a huge kind of forested area, and you need to know that I'm not a very competitive person, but if there is any sector or sport that I wish I could go professional in, it would be hide and seek. Like, I don't know what it is about me. I've never sat down with a counselor to understand it fully, but I love some hide and seek. I loved hide and seek then, and I can tell you quite honestly, I still love hide and seek now. If you want to invite me over to your house and say, hey, I got a crazy idea, let's play hide and seek, I'm going to say, yep. What's the rules? Okay, how long do we get? And you're going to see me do some stupid things. Case in point, a couple years ago, we were playing with kids, because kids are a perfect way that I can manifest my ability to play hide and seek without anyone knowing. And so we had some of the cousins, and they were like, let's play hide and seek. And I was like, yes, let's play hide and seek. And Jenny, you're it. And then we're all hiding, right? And so I'm looking around the house, and I see behind the couch that there is this perfect space. And a problem with me is I'm a lot like a chihuahua. Like, I don't have a really good representation of my body size. And so I attempt to wedge myself into this very confined space behind the couch. And I am so happy because I think no one is ever going to find me. And I have shoved myself shoehorn style into the back of this couch, and I'm never coming out. So it doesn't matter anyway, right? And I'm in there. My wife walks into the room, and I'm like chuckling like some tiny little schoolgirl, because I think I have the best spot, and none of these 7-year-olds are ever going to be finding me. And while I'm sitting there, Jenny looks over, and she's like, I see you, Chris. And I was like, no! And she just looks at me, because now I have to get out, because what happens when you get caught? And so I begin to worm myself out, which takes like 5 minutes. And she was like, what were you thinking? Like, you were obviously right there. Like, why did you jam yourself in that hole? And I'm like, because hide and seek is my life passion, woman. That's why, okay? So it goes back to when I'm 10 years old. I love it, and I hear my neighbor coming around, so I dive into the bushes so I can't be seen. And when I do, I land on a bumblebee's nest. Now, you need to know that hornets aren't the only thing in the ground. Bumblebees are too. I don't know if you've ever seen a bumblebee, but they defy physics because they're fat little chubby bees that somehow fly with little tiny wings. It's really creepy. I know that they are chubby with little tiny wings because when I screamed, I was swarmed by them. See, when I landed, one stung me, and that triggered a party, and they all decided to show up instantaneously on my 10-year-old body. They covered me completely, and as I was screaming, they were trying to climb in my mouth, climb in my nose, and I could see them climbing across my eye. And all I could do was freeze. I told you this was traumatic. This is what I was telling my daughter right before bed. It's awesome. And so, like, I'm screaming, and my brother comes in, he beats them off of me. And what that does psychologically for me is that introduces me to an obsession that would last for decades. Also to a really traumatic allergen, so that if I ever got stung by them, I'd have to be hit with an EpiPen because my body would try to kill me in response to that bee sting. But here's what's fascinating about bees. I don't know if you've ever, remember, I was obsessed with them for decades. I've finally worked through my fear, so now I can actually stand around a bunch of bees. But at some points, I would push my children out of the way. I would sacrifice them to get away from bees. That's how, like on my honeymoon, I've said this before, on my honeymoon, walking into the cabin, a bee flew. I pushed my wife into the bushes, and I ran into the house. Like, I'm not joking. It was traumatic. But I've worked through that. I'm good now. I can hang out with bees, and we get along. But here's one of the cool things about bee stingers. This is a hypodermic needle under an electron microscope. This is a bee stinger under an electron microscope. I mean, it's serrated. It's made to go in and stick and rip and tear. Like, this thing is terrifying. And I think that David understood that our negative thoughts are a lot like a bee stinger. That they can get into us and they can hook. In any attempt to move, they go deeper and deeper and deeper, and they can live underneath the surface because they've gone so deep that we don't even think about them anymore. We don't even process through the memories that formed and forged us. And David, in his wisdom, understood that we have to think about our thoughts And so at the end of this beautiful song, he says to God, right, God, help me, search me, know my heart, test me, and know my anxious thoughts. The word test there is an interesting word because it literally means it's a call out from how you would purify metals, which was through turning up the heat and cooking them, and it would draw out the impurities that you didn't even know were there. He was saying to God, God, I know that there are things inside of my thoughts underneath the surface that have gotten stuck and barbed in like that bee stinger that I'm not even aware is there. Turn up the heat. Make me aware that it is there. And he says, my anxious thoughts. It's the disquieting stuff, the things that like you can't seem to get rid of. They become the background noise. But see, the problem with human beings is that if you've ever lived beside a road or a train track or in a city or had a noise machine on in a room with a small child, you know that the human brain can literally tune out things that are constant and always there. And you don't even know the sound is there until you turn it off or someone else turns it off. And David's saying, God, purify, draw out those things that I have accepted that I'm not even aware of. And the first thing that David does in this rhythm is he's intentionally looking in to his thought life, which is something that most of us feel the waves and the wake of the disquieted thoughts, but we never actually stop to look at them and to notice what they are. And the first part of that rhythm that David embodied, the first thing that was present in the Psalms is there was this intentional looking in to the mental and the emotional thought processes that were going on underneath the surface. He was aware that they were there. And that by becoming aware they're there, by bringing them up to the surface, being able to observe them, it put him in a position to do the very next thing, which was as they rose to the surface, he said, see if there's any offensive way in me. Now, this word offensive way is fascinating because it's not offensive in the way that you would think is like, oh, that smell is offensive. This had a moral component to it. What he's really saying is, see if there are any lies in me, any sins within me, things that do not line up with who God is and what God says that I have believed. See if there are any lies living in me. What David understood was that lies like that bee stinger can get barbed in deep and we forget they're even there and we just live with the despair that they cause. Now, what's fascinating, the reason I love the Bible, I didn't become a Christian until college, and so I had a lot of skepticism about faith, about the Christian faith specifically, especially about a book written thousands of years ago that somehow has some type of relevance or importance for everyday life. I read Shakespeare, and I can tell you when I couldn't even understand Shakespeare, and it's only 500 years old. So the idea for me, especially as someone who was being trained as a scientist, that a book written 3,000 years ago could actually have any significance in my life was just absurd to me. And one of the things that happened after I became a Christian was I began to stand in awe of the Bible. I read a lot. Reading is how I refresh my mind. It's one of those things that recharges me in the way that you have things that recharge you. And one of the things that I notice frequently is how oftentimes what is new and breakthrough and like earth-shattering, or I listen to people, whether it's an HBS article or whether it's some study coming out of some prestigious university in sociology or psychology or fill-in-the-blank-ology, and they'll have like, we've just discovered this thing. And people are like, oh my goodness, can you believe they just discovered this thing? And then I'm like, I read that thing in my Bible last week. That thing is not new. That's an old thing that the Bible talked about 3,000 years ago. Case in point, what David understands is that one of the roots that produces the fruit of unhealthy thinking is lies. And in 1976, Aaron Beck created what was called the cognitive negative triad. And he basically was able to distill this same pattern that underneath the fruit of unhealthy mental and emotional life was a set of 3 different lies that often were either working together or were present in one form or another. And he essentially said the 3 lies that are underneath the surface is a lie about you, that I'm worthless, I hate myself, that I'm less valuable. You hear this lie even manifest in the mouths of little kids when they say things like, I'm just stupid, or I'm worthless, or a 3 or 4-year-old saying I'm a bad kid, right? That this lie about you. Then there's a lie about your world. That's the second one of the negative triads that he discovered. And it's this idea that the world doesn't care about me. And the world can represent your family, the world can represent your coworkers, the world can represent some significant other in a relationship if you've ever walked through a divorce or a horrible breakup, right? Like, it's a lie that comes from your world, that's about your world. I don't matter. No one wants to be my friend. No one cares about me. Sometimes those lies are explicitly said to you, and sometimes those lies implicitly creep in. Maybe you're a middle school kid or you're a 5th grader, and you just don't feel like you fit in, and you can't seem to find a friend. And one of the lies that you can pull from that is that, well, nobody cares about me. Nobody wants to be my friend. So this is how it works. It can be implicit. No one ever had to teach you. You just kind of absorbed it and adopted it. And then the third lie is a lie about your future. And it's that things will never get better. Things are never going to change. This past week, I lost a former student to suicide. And this was the lie underneath the surface. It's just this sense that things are never going to get better. I'm always going to live in this dark place, in this sad place. And this lie creeps in, and it can be about our job, it can be about our marriage, it can be about our relationships, it can be about our finances. But I would argue, without ever sitting down to hear most of the lies you believe, that what Aaron Beck discerned is 100% accurate and true about you and me. That at the root of the negative thoughts that are present in your life and in my life, they're rooted in one of 3 areas. It's either a lie about you, a lie about your world, or a lie about your future. But this was something that David understood because he wrote Psalm 139, not in 1976 after Aaron Beck discovered the cognitive triad. He wrote Psalm 139 about 3,000 years ago, with an awareness that there are lies that are present. Now, what's been done that's really helpful since 1976 is others have built on this concept of the cognitive triad, the negative triad, and now there are about 15 different labels that exist of different negative thought patterns that come out of this. There are about 15 different patterns or permutations, computations of these 3 lies. And I want to send them to you this week. I don't have time in this message to walk through all 15, but I would argue that if you sit down with them this week and you look at those 15, you can probably identify 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 of the lies that you oftentimes fall into the trap of believing. And it's in one of these 15 or maybe 4 or 5 of these 15 that most of your struggles are there. And if you can just start to become aware of, not just looking in and noticing them, you're looking out for the lies, right? So David's like, God, help me to look in, to see my thoughts, to become aware of what's in there. But then help me to look out for the lies that are in there, that are working against me, that are the hooks and the traps and the nets that hold me back in my life. And that I want to make sure you get that. And we've had so many people who've come to Encounter Church over this last year. Last week, one of the things that's even been fascinating is we actually have more people online every single week watching this church on Sundays than we have sitting in this room right now because of the pandemic. And so we've seen about 50 first-time people walk through the doors and just in person, and we've seen more than that online. And I recognize that we don't have most of your emails. And so I'm going to send this thing out, and I want to make sure you get it. And so we've created this website, encounterchurch.com/email. And if you don't get weekly emails from us, then I want you to go here because we send them out. And if you do get emails already, then I still want you to go here because we actually have a new system that we're working on that we'll be rolling out that has some nuances to it and some specialties that we're really excited about that is going to allow us to even better communicate. But in order to roll out that new system, we actually need you to do something internally for us. And so you go to that email, go to encounterchurch.com/email. It'll take about 30 seconds. Fill out what you're interested in. Then this week, around Wednesday, Thursday, you'll actually get all 15 of the predominant lies that most of us struggle with. And I think it will be incredibly helpful for you. All right? But I want you to notice that he doesn't just say, God, point out the lies. He then moves and he says, and lead me in the way everlasting. Which is an interesting way to end his prayer. He's like, God, I know there are so many lies there. Help me to follow the truth. Now, I haven't given you any of the rest of Psalm 139, but I think this is what's really fascinating to me. David, who is the most prolific writer of songs and psalms in the Old Testament, who writes words that literally, under the Spirit of God guiding him, are words of truth that we still read and reflect on almost 3,000 years later, is asking God to help him spot the lies and believe the truth. Now here's crazy. Right before he writes this, he says, I praise you because I am fearfully. Verse 14, 15, all right? I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you. Aaron Beck's cognitive triad. All three of those lies. In these 4 verses, David explicitly speaks a truth that dissects and disarms all 3 of those lies. The lie about you, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. The lie about your world, not caring. No, God, you see me when I sit down and when I rise. You saw me when I was being formed. Like you care. You think about me. And my future, it will never get better. God, you know every single day of my life before it comes to pass. I am precious to you. Here's a man who disarms in just 4 verses every one of the lies in the cognitive triad. And yet, he's still crying out to God, help me not believe the lies. I think that should tell you and me something. That if the man who could write truth and literally write words that some of us need to read regularly to fight against the lies that we believe, struggle with believing lies, then it means that all of us are going to struggle with the same thing. And that what David is doing is he is crying out and he is fighting. I don't know if you heard about this past week, but there was a 70-year-old woman in Massachusetts named Donna who was working on putting her Christmas lights up. And as she was doing it, she heard something she thought was a sound of a car coming by. And she looked, and she kept back to the lights, and then out of nowhere, a 45-pound raccoon leapt on her and began to attack her. Okay? And was going at it. And she described in her Facebook post, this is an actual picture from her Facebook post, of the hoodie she was wearing when she got attacked. The raccoon was yelling, and she was yelling, and the raccoon was lit into her, and she's trying to fight this 45-pound raccoon off of her. And she finally gets it into a neck lock, and she begins to squeeze, and she talks about hearing the bones pop and hearing them crack, and it's screaming louder, and she's pulling harder and harder, and then it finally lets go, and she drops it, and the 45-pound raccoon walks off. She's like, phew. Now, naturally, everyone's like, that raccoon was clearly rabid because it just attacked you. But what we were able to later figure out was that it was actually just a Buffalo Bills fan who was still bitter about last week's game, and she was wearing her Patriots hoodie, and so that's actually what went down. But the point of that is avoid Buffalo Bill raccoon fans. But specifically, the bigger point is I think what this woman does when she gets attacked by that raccoon, I would have wet myself. Right? But she well, I'm going to get this thing in a neck lock, and she locks a 70-year-old woman, puts the thing in a neck lock. Look at the holes, the teeth marks in this thing. And she is fighting for her life and going all Jack Bauer on that raccoon. Straight up I will snap your neck, and you walk off. And I think she had the tenacity that David is crying out to God with, that you and I have to cry out to God with. To say, God, help me fight for truth, because it is so easy to believe the lies. And if David could struggle with that, then you and I are going to struggle too. And that what we need to do as our operating system is to look in and to look out for the lies. And the reason David could look in, become aware, and never despair about the constant struggle with the lies is that David, in the midst of this broader sweep of this psalm, ultimately rooted his life in looking up. That David understood that there is good news for those who struggle. That there is a God who is for them and with them. And David writes this 3,000 years ago without any of the awareness of ultimately what we will know today. As we celebrate Christmas, we know that God is with us and for us. Because hope was here. That hope is here. That is the central message of the Christian story, is that God stepped into our story so it didn't have to stay the same story. That truth arrived so that we could be set free from the power of lies. That the beauty of the Christmas story is that God is with us, for us, and that the truth walks in a way that light is shined in the darkness, and the darkness could not overcome it. That's what we celebrate every single Christmas. And by looking in and looking out, but that very essential foundational last step of always looking up and allowing truth to keep us grounded, to keep us focused, to be that compass that's always pointing us north, even when it's dark. To realize, like my daughter and I were talking about yesterday, driving around and it was raining. She was like, Daddy, above the clouds, is the sun shining bright right now? I was like, yep, sweetie, it's actually my favorite thing about flying on rainy days, is the moment when the rain disappears and you break above the clouds and you realize the sun is shining bright and the sky is blue. Like, that's what God does for us in the Christmas story. Is that no matter how dark, no matter how kind of dreary or desperate it may feel, the sun, the S-O-N, is still shining. And that light, no darkness can overcome it. And that's why it's good news. Let's pray. God, thank you. Thank you for the good tidings of great joy, of the life change that it produces in us and through us. I pray, Father, for wisdom and discernment for us, courage and confidence for us to be able to look in and to look out for the lies and to look up for the truth. Thank you that the story that we may find ourselves in doesn't have to be the story that we stay in. Thank you that you're writing a better story. And help us to stand in faith and in trust, believing that, and confident in that. And it's in your name, Jesus, that I pray. Amen. I want to say thank you. I love, even I was just thinking about just how the Christmas story is a story that changes all other stories. And I believe the church, that's meant to be our mission, is to be that reminder for people that our storylines don't have to stay the same, that there can be a new story in the midst of the bad story. I mean, that's what the gospel is. It's good news. It's a good story. It's a change. That we're in that season of time as a church in December where we set aside that month, and from a generosity practice, we actually say, you know what, how do we as a church intentionally write better stories for the world around us in a way that makes a difference? And it's because of your generosity for those who call Encounter Church home. Like last week, we just talked about how we were able to change some of the storylines because of a generosity gift that we made, because of your generosity, the storylines of people in this community, that we're going to be able to change the storyline of people who are currently going through the devastation, because this past week, it's been estimated about 100 people potentially have lost their lives through these terrifying tornadoes that swept through. And that while you were sleeping, your generosity already is going to be at work, that through existing partnership and a new partnership that we're forming in 2022 with a humanitarian relief agency that does incredible good, that we've just been introduced to, that we're super excited about, that through those partnerships that we get to be a part of providing for people in those 4 states that were devastated by those tornadoes. That generosity is because you give. That you give beyond what you think is just the comfortable level, but that you give sacrificially. It's why one of the storylines that we're going to be stepping into, that I'm going to be sharing with you in March of next year, you're going to actually get to hear from the CEO of this company who's going to be here speaking for us. But we're actually stepping into a ministry in Africa, and your generosity in 2022 out of what you do through this month and Love Does is literally going to help send a girl to pharmacy school. So you're actually going to be paying for college with a partnership with this company for this young woman to become a pharmacist in a community, in a nation where a woman going to college is not the norm like it should be. And that your generosity is going to allow a woman's life to be changed in college and the ripple effect for generation to come. That's what the church is meant to look like. That's the type of stories that we talk about changes. So thank you. Thank you in advance for those who've automated and who give every single week or every other week or however you've set it up. Thank you for those who give through the box at the cafe. And thank you for those who give through encounterchurch.com/give. But because I believe in the stories that are being changed by the generosity, if you come here and you don't even believe what we believe, I want to say this month, give. Let it go to Love Does. Because when it goes there, it's going to make a difference in the storylines of people in our community and around the world. And that's exciting to be a part of. So this month, you're going to hear me continue to tell those stories because God's at work, and it's super exciting to be a part of it. But we're not done. We've got a few minutes, and before we leave, we're going to sing a song that I think some of us need to sing with confidence and boldness today. It's a song that you've heard once or twice. It's a song called The Story I'll Tell. That in the last almost 2 years of our lives, some of us have walked through all types of storylines. With our marriage, with our finances, with our kids, with our health. Some of us have stared uncertainty and death straight in the face. And this is just a powerful song and a reminder of the God of Christmas who steps into our storyline so that there can be a new headline to our life. So I want to invite you to stand, and our team is going to lead us, and for many of us, introduce us to a song that I think is incredibly powerful. So let's sing.
It's hard to see. down through the years. Look on this moment, see your hand on it, know you were here. And I'll testify of the battles you've won, how you were my portion when there wasn't enough. And I'll testify of the seas that we crossed, the waters you parted, the ways that I've walked, singing, oh, 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 my God did not fail. Oh, 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 it's the story I'll tell, singing, oh, 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 I know it is well. Oh, 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 it's the story I'll tell. Believing gets hard when options are few, when I can't see what you're doing. I know that you're proving you're the God who comes through. And oh, but I know that over the years I'll look back on this moment and see your hand on it and know you were here. And I'll testify of the battles you've won, how you were my portion when there wasn't enough. And I'll testify of the seas that we've crossed, the waters you parted, the waves that I've walked, singing, oh, 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 my God did not fail. Singing, oh, 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 it's the story I'll tell. Singing, oh, 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 I know it is well. Oh, 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 it's the story I'll tell. All that is left is highest praises. So sing hallelujah to the Rock of Ages. Sing all that is left. All that is left is highest praises. So sing hallelujah to the Rock of Ages. Oh, 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 my God did not fail. Singing, oh, 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 it's
We're not done. Okay. So last week was invited to a pretty cool moment, and a couple of us were down in this kind of thing playing out that we'll talk about later. And I'm sitting in the room, and we're on the precipice of seeing a dream that will play out in 2022 that I'm super excited about, that we'll talk about later. Because that's not the thing that I want to talk about right now. Because I'm sitting there, and I'm a couple sections over from a moment, from a place, from a chair, literally a chair, that I so vividly remember. And I remember in early 2017, sitting in that chair just right over there, and I'm looking at that chair, and I'm just overwhelmed. Because I remember sitting in that chair, and in that moment, as a pastor, we had been using a facility that we were renting, and because as a church, we really do want to give back to the community, so we decided that we were like, man, we don't want to do a building, let's just rent. And that way we can invest in the school system. And so we're doing that. And the school system says, look, we don't like a church here. So they kick us out, and we're homeless. And we don't have a ton of money, and we're trying to figure out what we're going to do. And I remember feeling the weight of where do we go? What do we do? Because the school board had pushed us out of all the biggest meeting spaces in the community where we were, just right over there. And we were homeless. Like, there was nowhere to go except to step into a place like this. And which was so beyond what financially we could do. And I just remember crying out to God, being like, God, there's no way. Like, I just don't see how this could ever happen. And just feeling so overwhelmed and heavy. And while I'm grieving, whatever that's going to be, I'm thinking about the personal story that Jenny and I are in the midst of wanting to have a child, and we can't. And just feeling the weight of that. And I remember sitting in that chair being so overwhelmed by where I was and the story I was in. A story that looked like a church was going to have to close its door, and a story that looked like a family that was never going to grow anymore. And just being in that place and crying out to God, knowing that I couldn't do anything in my own power. I don't have a check that I could write to solve this problem, and physiologically I can't fix this problem. And I just remember crying out to God, God, if you're real, if you're there, if you, I know you can do this. Can you please step into this storyline, Jesus? And I'm sitting there this past week, and I'm watching this thing fold out, and I'm there because of a new dream and some new doors that God's opening. And he's just tapping me on my shoulder, and he's like, no. I'm excited about the dreams. Can we go back to the story that you had 4 years ago? Can we go back to that moment when you sat up right up there and you had no idea of what I could do? We're sitting in a room that did not exist then, that God provided for. And I came into this room before you came into this room to do a mic check, and I was holding my son in my arms, and he's telling me I should do a different conclusion because he's 2 and he knows everything. And he's sitting right here right beside me in the microphone, and I get to put that dream to bed every single night when he lets me, because he likes mommy more. And I get to gather with you every single week here. And there's some things I'm dreaming about. There's some desperate things I'm crying out for. And I imagine there's some things that you are too. That some of you walked in and you might look good. You might pretend like you got it all together. Your kids behaved. Your marriage looks okay because when you're not talking to each other, sitting beside each other, it looks like it's all right. Right? But some of us walked in, some of us sitting online right now, turned on this service with a sense that like, oh, they don't see how messed up my life is. But we've all been in places before where we didn't know how the story was going to end. And for a few of you who've come in here today, for a few of you who've turned on this service online, I just feel the impression that we need to stop in this moment. We just sang this song about the story I will tell, of the waters he's parted, the ways we've walked. And God reminded me this week of where I was 4 years ago in my story and where I am in today. And I think for some of us, I want to give you some faith to believe about your story right now. I want to lend you the faith of my story from 4 years ago and say, your story's not done where you are right now either. That I know it's dark, I know it's heavy, I know it's uncertain, I know you're unsure, I know it feels like it's the end. But for some of you, this is not the end of your story. It's the end of the chapter, the cliffhanger, the moment where you think all is lost. But then in a blink of an eye, in a turn of the mighty one's hand, a new chapter is started. A new story is told. New hope is given. New freedom is found. That you find the strength to begin to struggle with the addiction in a way that you never have before. That you don't wave the white flag anymore. That you begin to look at your relationship status as not a dead end or a never will be, and maybe to begin to imagine that the God who created you might have something for you in that storyline of your life. And so we wanted to give you an opportunity with a little bit of borrowed faith to give you a chance to sing. We've sang collectively as a group, but some of you need to say, as your future self, that I'll testify of the battles you've won. The very battles right now that feel like I am losing. I'm going to sing one day the song about what you did. I'm telling you, the story you're in is not done. This is not a life sentence for you. It is a life season for you. That there can be a hope, a brightness, a life on the other side of this moment. And that you want to borrow faith from that future version of you and say, I will testify. And so we want to give you a chance to sing that, to say that on behalf of future you. That He's not done with you. He's not done in you what He wants to do. So let's sing and declare that He is here.
Let's do that one more time and I'll testify. And
good news is that God isn't, and I'm just so thankful to remember and the reminder of those lies I don't need to listen to, that God's always working, and I can testify myself to some of the battles that he's won in my life, so I'm so thankful. We thank you for coming today. A couple things coming up. Students, grades 6 through 12. Next week, we're going to have a Christmas party, 6 o'clock here at the church. Hope you can join us. You can join us tonight, too, if you like, 6:15 to 7:30. We're having a nacho bar if you like to eat, and I know you do. And then also our services, we will have a service next week, same time, 10:30. We will not meet on the 26th, but we will have a Christmas Eve service at 4 o'clock on December 24th, so we hope that you can join us. Hope you have a great week and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Thanks for coming.